artificial lighting. I think that's probably fluorescent lighting that's in there behind it. This is Jesus knocking at the door, and on the right-hand side is the artwork for thistles, and those are the thistles, plants, and then Jesus holding a lamp, and then the building that he's knocking the door to has got a real, beautiful hinge and artwork, which kind of adds to the overall story. And so there's vines and flowers, there's roses. I think that was something from the client that wanted to have the roses in there too. So that turned out really nice. So the stained glass windows were done when this particular edition was made. And so if you look, this has a depiction of a number of different scenes. There's the Nativity with the 3 crowns when when Jesus is born and he's visited by the kings, and then there's stories from the Bible. There's the loaves and fishes miracle. There's also the parable of the houses that are built on rock, or the houses that are built on sand, and the storm comes and washes away, and there's the crucifixion. And then there's also the 12 apostles. Those are the different symbols for the 12 apostles. And there's also other symbols for Jesus, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So there's the Trinity symbols here and praying hands. On the left-hand side, I believe I've got, this is the Last Supper. So this is the window that depicts the holy sacraments of the communion and baptism. And it has a table, very simple table that's sort of like what Jesus would have, these were poor people, and so I didn't want to make a fancy table, so it's kind of like a handmade table with a simple cup and the bread. And then this little detail here is kind of like a foreshadowing of the crucifixion, I think, with the X, which is sort of a cross. Across the bottom of the windows are symbols for the 4 evangelists, the 4 Gospels. And this one is descending dove for the Holy Spirit, when the Holy Spirit descends on Jesus during the baptism. And there's a symbol for the Holy Bible at the top. And then beautiful antique colors. This glass is painted. So what happens is the surface of the glass is painted with a special enamel and then fired in a kiln so that this glass painting is permanent. This has been here for almost 20 years, I believe. And so the glass paint, the windows look like they did when we put them in. They've held up really, really well. And so these were new stained glass windows that we made about 20 years ago. This is one of the most recent windows that we've done here for the Central United Methodist Church. This is for the Maurice Hall. I believe his wife's name is Kathy Hall.
It's Kathy's parents.
Right, and so this is in memory of her parents and the mother, Frances. There's a 3rd generation Frances, the little girl.
Yes.
And she's so cute. When we came, the day that we put it in, the whole family was here. Kathy's mom was here, and then the little girl, who was like 4th generation, was here. And I've got this really cute picture of the little girl in front of the window with her name in it. So this is Christ the Good Shepherd, and it's done in a very traditional style in that we used opalescent glass, which is a glass that has all the color mixed in it, and then it's also opalescent, so it stops the glare. It's a particular type of glass. And then the Jesus figure then is done with glass painting, like this was done with glass painting for the symbols. And so the paint is applied by an artist. In this case, we have a gentleman, Robert Cooper, who's been in the studio for about 20 years now, or even longer, who's just really developed a great skill and ability to do that work. and he'll do the painting of the face and the hands and all the other details like the lambs, and a little bit of a landscape. So we tried to keep this one in more of a traditional vein, and it's using some really beautiful opalescent glass. This is called ring model. If you noticed that it has these patterns, and you can see the patterns up here at the top. Hope that's not me. And so the ring model glass is up there. So it's a beautiful technique that the glass manufacturers make. And so that ring model glass would be the type of glass that was popularized by Tiffany around the late 1800s, early 1900s. Tiffany developed a whole style of stained glass windows based on this particular opalescent. So
this is an image we're looking at.
Right.
Right. With
Right.
the lamp.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful image, and it's been, the basic composition has been done a number of different times. So it's definitely something that people relate to in terms of its tradition. It's a symbol of the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd symbol goes all the way back to the earliest time of the Christian church, the catacombs in Rome, where the Christians would bury people and they would decorate the walls in the catacombs. And one of the very first symbols in the Christian church was the Good Shepherd. And it was a young person holding a lamb, and it was a symbol that we've used since then, for 2,000 years. So using the Good Shepherd theme is a very appropriate one for the church because it has such a long, long tradition. And then you have the Good Shepherd, and then the dove is also another one of the very early symbols that was used from the very earliest times. So we're going to take a step into the sanctuary.
This here
Yep.
tells about all the art of the stained glass that was given in memory or in honor of different ones. We did not want names put on the stained glass. We did not catch this one. This one has the McDonald's name on it, and had we caught it beforehand, that probably would not have been allowed. They would have had to put their name on this plaque as well. But you'll notice throughout the church, this is really the only stained glass piece that has someone's name on it. The rest of them do not.
We can step in here for a second. I think it's going to be right next door.
Do you want to go in here, or then you want to go to the chapel?
The chapel. Let's go in here first. Let's go in here. And we can walk by the chapel on the way out, right? I think so.
You can, yeah.
The chapel is right next door.
Yeah, it's just right through there.
Yeah. So, it's okay, I'm sure.
You want to live the light on behind Jesus?
Oh, we could. Do you know where the switch is? God, it smells like furniture polish in here. Come on in. Y'all can come down here. Y'all can walk down here so you can see more. There's Jesus praying in the garden, is behind the pulpit and the altar. And these windows are very traditional American style stained glass windows. And if you notice that all of the color is all mixed up in the glass, that's the opalescent style of glass that was popularized and made in America around the 1870s, 1880s, and that opalescent glass was one of the materials that the Tiffany and other studios like Tiffany developed into an American style of stained glass windows. And so when you see that colored glass like this that's solid and opaque, one of the reasons that it's that way is because you're controlling the glare of the sunlight. We're going to see some other stained glass windows where we can talk about sunlight, but the benefit of having this as a solid surface, in a sense, it's not transparent so much, it lets light through, it's translucent, but it stops the glare. And so if you had this windows here and it was transparent glass where it was clear, it would be so hot with the sun right now, with this radiation coming in, that it'd be hard to heat and cool this building. It'd certainly be hard to keep it cool. But so the opalescent glass then stops the sunlight from being too glary, but it also darkens the room a little bit, and it provides color and design. When you start doing symbols like these, you'll notice in these windows they'll have, this is cross and crown, of course, and then faith, hope, and charity is one of my favorites because it's real old-fashioned. So when you start doing a window that has a lot of symbolism and imagery, then all of this has to be hand-painted by an artisan. So this is expensive to do because of the amount of time it takes to do the artwork, where the opalescent glass has the color and design all the way through it. So when you do a window like this, so it's sort of a combination of things. You have a beautiful design in terms of the composition, probably repeats a lot of what's going on in the building. You'll notice the arch that's over the Jesus window praying in the garden. So then the stained glass artist repeated that arch in the stained glass window so that architecturally this design and that would have a similarity to it. So that's one of the things that you do as a stained glass designer, is to try to make the window fit where it belongs. It looks like it kind of grew out of the architectural style. That's the great tradition in stained glass. I bet we need to be moving on. What time is it? Okay. Okay, you know where.
Yeah, I don't have my keys on me.
That's okay.
Hey, do you have your keys? Yeah.
Right.
That window's-
I wanted to mention it. So we did these windows too. Yes. So on your way through the hallway.
We're gonna go out, he's got his keys, so we're gonna go through the.
Okay.
do a short route.
So you can come back, and this is Jesus the Ascension. This was done at the same time that we did these windows. You can see the color of the borders and everything was done in a very similar style, and that's a very traditional symbol of Jesus' resurrection. He's in the clouds there with his robes flowing and all. So that was done at the same time that we did these windows. No, we didn't. These are not. I just wanted to say first, when everybody gets in here, that we did not make these stained glass windows. These were done probably 40 years ago when this little chapel was added, would be my guess. And so this is probably a studio from Memphis. I don't think they're no longer in business. But you can see the artistry and the design and the detail of the Good Shepherd here, and then you can compare it to the Good Shepherd that our studio did and the artistry. So there's a great variety of styles and techniques that are available to do stained glass windows in. And so they have different painted scenes around the perimeter that you can look at. And also, so instead of opalescent glass, so this is a solid color of glass that has glass paint on it that's fired in the kiln. And so the reason that a stained glass studio would do this is to control the amount of glare and sunlight coming in. So this window is facing the west wall. So when that sun comes around to the west side, if this glass didn't have, this surface that was painted, it would probably just be so glary you could hardly sit in here. So that's part of the design of a stained glass window, series of windows, is taking into consideration what the sunlight does. It's also, of course, the symbolism and the imagery and how beautiful the windows are, but one of the things that we're tasked with is trying to solve technical problems like sunlight and glare. And so these windows would not let any UV light in here to sometimes you can get sunlight into a room and it'll bleach out the colors of the carpets and the fabrics and everything. But these windows are not doing that. So y'all might have that experience there. And it's maddening. There's nothing you can do about it except put stained glass windows in. Okay. Right, so when we walk by, we're going to see that this window is protected with clear glass on the outside. And what we're using now is laminated glass. The laminated glass is the same kind of glass that you have in the windshield of your car, and it protects the stained glass window from hailstorm and from damage. And We'll talk about that a little more when we get up here to the sanctuary at St. Paul's. So I wanted to point this window out, and this is a stained glass window that we did. Are we rolling?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is a stained glass window that we did, and it's a cross in the center, and that cross, the design of the background of the field of the cross and then the four gospel symbols are taken from the cross that's on the altar, the brass cross that's on the altar, and I borrowed it. And so this is an Easter lily theme. And if you notice, there's a little teacup in the window, and it's a lovely story because the man that donated the window, his grandmother, one of her things was tea, and she would invite people over for tea, and he remembers going there as a child for tea. So we put the little teacup in there as a memory of his grandmother. I wish I had the family's names, but I'm not sure if I do. But so it's a lovely story, kind of personalizing the themes. So now this building is called Neo-Gothic, and so about 1850s there became an interest in reviving the Gothic architecture in England and in France and places. And so there was a number of different architects that developed a style of reviving Gothic architecture. You think of the original beautiful churches in Northern Europe that were built in the 1200s and 1300s. And so this building is called Gothic Revival, and the stained glass windows are intended to be a revival of the ancient Gothic window styles at the time. So these stained glass windows then are done in a manner that favors that tradition of Gothic windows, and I'll show you some of the different parts about it. One of the things that the Gothic stained glass windows would do is they would have all this additional decorative detail, architectural elements that are around the perimeter. That's a characteristic style of Gothic stained glass, and then across the bottom. And then you have these painted scenes in the middle. And the Gothic stained glass windows are very characteristic. They have a very strong trace line. So when you're looking at the detail of these windows, you can see in a face the eyebrows and the eyes, the lips, all that's a real strong black line. That's called a trace line. And then the artist would come back and put a matte over the finish of the black lines, and to be able to come back and do highlights to create the highlights. And so it's all about the light, so that as the light comes through the stained glass window, then the stained glass artist is trying to manipulate the light in order to depict the scene and then to modulate the amount of glare and everything that's coming through. So these windows, most of these windows are done in that Neo-Gothic style, except for the window behind the altar. Now that's an American stained glass window. You can tell it's American stained glass because it has opalescent glass in it. So these stained glass windows on the side are done with hand-blown European glass, and the hand-blown European glass is transparent. And if you were to look at the stained glass windows in certain areas, I'll point this out over here. When you walk by this window, these highlights in the purple robe here do not have any glass paint on it, so that you're seeing through the transparent glass to the outside. So that technique enlivens the windows. It kind of creates a highlight, but it also creates movement, because as the cars go by or the people walk by, or as you move around the room, then the window has a certain kind of sparkle to it. So all of that is intentional by the stained glass artist to make the window lively and colorful and have a lot of visual appeal to it. Now the window behind the altar was an American stained glass window, probably done, I would say, 1880s and 90s. It's a pretty old window, and you can see the opalescent style of glass in the background where the color is all the way through it. So there, the color goes all the way through the glass in order to control the glare. But in the Gothic Revival stained glass windows, the paint is on the surface of transparent glass in order to create the designs and also to kind of control the amount of glare that comes through the stained glass. Now that stained glass window was taken out. Our company took that window out and took it to our studio in Jackson and completely rebuilt it and then put it back in. And I believe that we had to reproduce one of the forearms or one of maybe the thigh or something had to be repainted because it wasn't a very good match. And then we put it all back in. We built a brand new wooden jamb. It was quite a big project because all of that was redone. The jamb had been damaged by termites, and then the stained glass window had to be completely taken apart and put back together again. So after about 100 years, stained glass windows will need to have repair work on them. So now before we go to the other part of the building, are there any questions?
The design that they've chosen seems to be all Christ-centered, right? We're
Yes.
looking at maybe Old Testament, New Testament.
Well, what I would say is that you have the life of Christ, starting with the Annunciation, where the angel comes and speaks to Mary and says that you're going to have God's baby. And then this is the Nativity with Mary and then the three wise men. This is Jesus in the temple when he's presented to the church, and then he's marveling the wise men with his knowledge. And then here he is with St. Andrew and the fishermen of men. And then it carries around Christ as the children theme.
And that's one of the things we're looking at.
And then this is going to be Palm Sunday here. So you can follow it all the way around, So they tell the life of Jesus through the stained glass windows. Last Supper, there's praying in the garden, and there's this is Jesus appears to the people that come to the garden, and he's there. And then we have this one must be this is when Jesus appears on the road to Emmaus, would be my guess. These are people that are traveling and they see Jesus. So we have the story, and then of course we have the crucifixion, which is over the altar. And if you look at the cross that's there on the altar, you can see the detail in it, and that was what I had kind of borrowed some of the design from that for the cross that's in the window transom above the front doors. Right. And the window, the rose window up there, then that's going to be the ancient symbol, the monogram of HS. And anybody would win the pop test if they told us exactly what that means. But I get. Well, it's a sacred monogram. It's probably Latin or Greek letters that are woven together to mean something. Ichthus is one, but that's since I'm not a student of all the ancient languages, I'm not really that knowledgeable. Yeah. Okay. Whoops. Here we go. This is a beautiful little chapel that they renovated a few years ago. And these are glass windows that we made. This was for Joan Moore, who did this in memory of her husband who passed away, Mr. Moore. I'm not sure exactly. I think he was in the finance industry or something like that. But what she wanted to do was do something sort of very simple. And so we have the cross form in here, kind of repeat what's going on behind the pulpit, the altar. And then this is done with one sheet of glass. And I fired this in a kiln. I heated it up to like 1,500 degrees, and it melted around a mold that I made. All of these parts are molded. And then we came back with silver stain, which is a very old stained glass technique of changing the glass yellow. And so when you move around, it's really quite lovely, I think, in terms of the texture and everything. And that was done in memory of her husband. And we're going to go out. I'll catch up with y'all.
You and Marshall were both missing
Now,
one.
right when you're looking at this window, the first thing you see is obviously the main character. But if you look-
Audio good?
Right.
Okay, so the stained glass windows here have a very interesting history because after Hurricane Katrina came through, the building was damaged, and there was a good bit of damage on the roof, foundation, and then it's a saga about the negotiations with the insurance company, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so what we did was come through here and do repair work on all the stained glass windows. This large window on the east and then this window on the south, we took out and then had brand new wooden jambs made because the original was not of a substantial nature, so we had to rebuild them. And we came back and put them all in and rebuilt the stained glass windows and put the stained glass windows all back in. And so the windows are basically brand new after we had reworked them. And so these windows are examples of the American Gothic, and also the building is Neo-Gothic. And we were just talking about that when we were up at the Episcopal Church. So the Neo-Gothic style of architecture was very influential, and this building is an example of that style. And if I'm not mistaken, Prospect Presbyterian Church has kind of got some of that Neo-Gothic look to it with the arches and everything. And so these windows are opalescent glass, the American style of opalescent, and beautiful color selections and symbols that are in all the different windows. You can see the lamp of knowledge, descending dove. I guess that's going to be I can't see what that symbol is from here. There's wheat, there's grapes, there's Easter lilies down there, I suppose. And up here is the anchor with the hope. I'm doing a symbol of the anchor for West Point. First Presbyterian Church, West Point. Your friend up there, Brandon.
Okay.
He was up there. And so we're doing a number of different smaller these symbols. So that's a very traditional part of it, is to have a series of stained glass windows that go down the side, and then you would have symbols in each window, and then you could have larger windows that would depict a scene from the life of Christ. That's a great tradition there. Do you know any other stories about the church that you can tell us?
This image here, Kairos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The lights are usually on, but it's upstairs. You got to turn them on.
Right.
And then the Alpha and Omega theme over there, which we have in our church.
Right, right.
And, notice that they do put the names. The Episcopal and
Mm-hmm.
this church has put the names here. Later on, when I was here, more was dedicated, and we tended to, like, you see their plaques everywhere. So Dr. Ackerson was here 33 years, and Dr. Griffin was here 35 years. I made it half that, okay? But,
Right.
it's just, they're showing that people matter here as
Mhm.
much as the windows. So the storytelling piece is included in this. And that's something we'd have to decide is where do you would like the names?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Well-
the Methodist Church had the plaque.
Well, there's different schools of thought on that, and I kind of like the names in there because 100 years from now, when people are looking for their ancestors, they're going to be going to the windows and seeing names that they recognize, and so it's kind of part of a history. I love this little carved descending dove. I'd forgotten about that. That's
Pete
really,
Willis did that.
huh?
Pete Willis did that. He designed that.
I'm not sure that I ever recall seeing that.
That's pretty new.
Pete
Mhm.
Willis, the pharmacist,
No,
Jerry-
he was the-
no.
Wasn't it an artist that was a member of your
Charlie Bustler.
that did paintings and whatnot? That's not him. This is somebody else.
Pete Willis, CSC.
And symbolism and imagery is into everything. So that's the trefoil, would be a symbol for the Trinity. You can see it there. And even in the pew cushions, they have wine for the grapes, and then they have the chalice and the host, the bread, and the other one is Alpha and the Omega. And so they've incorporated it in there. Even the tradition of the Christian church, the symbolism of the Christian church, their logo. We're doing a new stained glass window for the addition next door to the church, and we're going to incorporate the symbol of the chalice with the cross in it as part of the traditions there. And so are there any other questions? Any questions? Y'all are being so brave. This has been a long walk down here. It's going to be even a longer walk on the way back.
Pops, I noticed in all three.
Oh yeah. Well, the red, what happens with red is that red advances and all the cool colors recede. So, the red really comes forward in a stained glass window. That's why a lot of times, I would really doubt that Jesus would have been, because red would have been a very expensive garment to have in the time of Christ. Of course, there's the purple in there, which we know that, he was dressed in purple and they cast lots for Jesus' purple robes as the king, the color. But red is used in stained glass windows a lot with the Jesus windows because it really stands out and it draws your attention to it. So it's not necessarily theological as it is most a design to allow the color to bring your attention to the focal point, which would be the Jesus figure in a stained glass window. So I got a phone call about a year and a half before the museum opened, and they were going to build a chapel. So this display represents how the Christian church has influenced artists in Mississippi. So when you go in there, there's Faith Hill and a bunch of other singers and people that have been, kind of grew out of the tradition of hymns and singing in the choir and that kind of thing. So then they thought that they would put a stained glass window where there was just going to be a church or the chapel. So they invited me to participate. They came over to Jackson one Friday, and there's a great little place downtown where we had catfish. Remember that? God, it was great. So then they told me that they wanted to do a stained glass window that sort of depicted different themes of Mississippi. So one of the artists that's depicted down in the Hall of Fame is Walter Anderson. So a lot of my artwork and style of things sort of is influenced by the Walter Anderson traditions. And so I'll point out some of the different symbolism in here. Of course, there's a blues guitar, and this would be the Mississippi River that goes through the window over here, the blue colors. And then this is a symbol which represents the past of Mississippi, sort of the columns of the classical architecture that would have been used in the plantations. So that goes all the way back to some of the earliest times of Mississippi. And this is the three crosses. When you drive around Mississippi, there'll be the three different crosses, the telephone poles, the pole barn poles that are decorating around. So I included that in there. And then there's also the tradition of a great tradition in the South and in Mississippi of the Jewish faith that was represented in lots of small towns had Jewish synagogues and active congregations all the way through the middle of middle of the 1900s. And then this is a tree which is a symbol of strength, and it's just a symbol that I thought would be appropriate for the design to balance the column on the other side. And there's a hurricane. You can see this hurricane that kind of wraps itself around, and inside the hurricane are the water is catfish. You can see I embossed catfish in here. And then this up here, the red-winged blackbird, that's a personal symbol of mine from many, many years ago. I was traveling up in the Delta. This would have been like 1977, 78, and a red-winged blackbird flew up in front of my pickup truck. And you know how birds, when they fly, they kind of stall and then they go like this? Well, the bird flew up and then sort of stalled, and that's when I looked at it, and it was this silhouette of this image. And ever since then, I've used this as sort of a avatar of my own, of a symbol and image, and so I incorporated it in here. And so you have the red-winged blackbird, and then you have a spirit of it. You have sort of a ghost image of it, which is, to me, sort of a symbol for Mississippi and the traditions. So you have a Romanesque arch, which ties this column with the tree as a column, ties that together. And then sunlight. You know, one of our great, the most powerful thing about summers of Mississippi and farming is the sunlight. So I have sun dappling across the landscape down here, and this is this texture on this pine tree that goes through. I mentioned the idea of being influenced by Walter Anderson. So one of Walter Anderson's favorite subjects was pine trees that would be along the Gulf Coast. So that's what this represents. It's a pine tree with the bark. And so we use this really intricate leadwork detail to kind of suggest the texture of the bark of the pine tree. And so to me, it's a representation of where, as an artist in stained glass in Mississippi, because this is supposed to, the Institute, Max, represents, you know, the finest examples of artistry that have come out of Mississippi. And so it was quite an honor to be included because they wanted me to do my thing as a glass artist. And so this represents a lot of what I have done over the years in terms of innovations and creativity. There's incorporated fused glass in here, and that's one of the things that I've been able to do over the years is incorporate this new modern technique into my artwork. And then there's acid etching, which is a very sophisticated and traditional technique that we've been able to incorporate and to make it modern and new. And so the window represents Mississippi to me, but it also represents an artist that's lived in Mississippi and had a career here and been able to thrive and to express themselves with a work of art. So it has a lot of different points, right? I hit it pretty much.
Well done.
Thank you. So if there are any other questions, you can, I'm trying to see if there's anything that I left out. I don't know there is. Oh, we're talking about the different kinds of glass. And if you look up here, this has got some of the ring modeled glass in there that I was pointing out in one of the earlier windows. And the ring modeled glass is definitely an American type of glass, but it's also got the antique glass I was telling you about, the hand-blown glass that was used. So this uses a combination of materials. So as an artist in glass, then, you know, I'm concerned about how much sunlight comes through the stained glass window, how to manipulate the sunlight, how to represent symbolism and imagery, whether it's going to be very realistic, neo-Gothic, or an American style of realistic glass painting. So what I've tried to do in my own career over the years is to have the studio have all of the skills available to a stained glass artist, and then to have that to perfection so that we're able to express ourselves as artists whenever we're called to do so in any kind of way. So that's been kind of my tradition in Mississippi for the studio, is to make it sort of a reservoir of all of the historical traditions of stained glass, but also the new stuff that's coming online too. So that's what the window represents to me.
And I will say, just to Andy, he was very easy to work with. We met, we told him what we wanted. The first drawing pretty much hit what we wanted. We only went through 1 or 2 rounds of comments, and then we had it. So it was a really seamless process, but sometimes working with artists, it can be a little difficult, but it wasn't at all.
Well, that's one of the, I've been doing this now for over 40 years, and I've all of those rough edges have been worn off.